So I have long believed that in life, what you look for tends to be what you see. That what you anticipate happening is what happens. And where you focus your mind colors your daily living. And from where I sit, there is a lot of great things. There are a lot of great things happening in this country. There are a lot of wonderful people. There's so many people doing things for others in selfless ways. There's so much that is right in our society, and I believe a lot of people have integrity. And whether we walk around in a cloud of despair or in light of optimism largely comes from our worldview. And while I believe everything I've just said, I do not believe that we, as Christians, can put our heads in the sand and say that we do not have a massive challenge in the year 2014. It's a challenge that is toxic, it erodes character, and in fact, takes down the basic fabric of our society. It's a challenge that undermines values and harms us from the inside out. And that challenge that I'm speaking about is that we as a country are struggling with a huge challenge of basic kindness or lack thereof. The video montage we just saw, in my view, is not fun, nor is it funny. In fact, I find it to be deeply disturbing. And I wanted to show it because I believe it represents just the tiny tip of the iceberg of where we are in America today with kindness. We're not in a good place at all. In fact, if an alien were to drop by Earth, in the United States in particular, such an alien would be compelled to report back to his fellow green creatures, you know, those Americans are really nasty to one another. It's as if there's a new acceptable norm in our culture. Being snarky is okay. It's fine to be sharply critical of another person. It's all right to offer cutting, snide comments about another human being. And condemning the character of another person with whom you disagree is not only fine, but in fact to be expected. In fact, you could say that lack of kindness is profitable. Why do you think the Aspen Times and Daily News is read? For the news content? Or for the letters to the editor, which are often filled with vicious personal attacks, negativity, and snide comments? And it's not just these two publications, but newspapers, blogs, tweets, Facebook posts, magazines, congressional minutes, and videotapes of town council meetings all over America. Put microphones at bus stops where parents wait for their children, coffee shop counters, water coolers in office buildings, and yes, even church fellowship halls, and you will hear a lot of unkindness. Now, before I go on, I have to say that while I am perplexed why some choose to spend their days in the pit of unkindness, there are moments in my own life, times within each and every day, when frankly my kindness tank is running low. I sometimes am not kind, whether outwardly or perhaps even worse, inwardly, in terms of the thoughts that run through my mind privately. Said another way, I am not standing before you today saying I have this kindness thing down at all. There is much work I need to do in this area. And while I am not going to point fingers, and I certainly hope that none of you will point fingers, what is crystal clear to me is that not being kind and our Christian faith is not compatible. Said another way, kindness in thought, word, and deed is part of the core of what it means to follow Jesus. Now, if we are earnest about our faith, each of us, I believe, is compelled and called by God to take the issue of kindness seriously. Our job is not to point fingers or walk around with any holier-than-thou attitude or air of superiority. Our call from God, I believe, is to invest all the energy there is around this subject on ourselves. Now today I begin a short two-part series on kindness. And as we get started, it's important to have a definition of kindness in mind. We all know what it means, but here is what a variety of dictionaries have to say about kindness and what it means. Kindness, it's a friendly, generous, and warm-hearted nature. Charitable, sympathetic, understanding, tolerant, agreeable, loving, benevolent, considerate, gentle, loving, behaving in such ways that show that you care deeply about other people and want to help them. Now, if you think about such definitions of kindness, it's clear that kindness is not so much just about action, but rather it's about something that runs deeply within a person. Kindness, in fact, is a character trait. It cuts across circumstances, people, events, and time. It is a way of being that underlies our essence of living. It colors who we are as people. Now, just for fun, the other day I looked up some quizzes that are supposed to help us determine how kind we are. Now, here's some of the questions from some of the quizzes I found, and you can answer yes or no to these. When I'm right, I like to rub it in and point out how wrong the other person is. I sometimes am sarcastic with others. I am mean to people I don't like. I lose my temper easily. I'm frankly better than a lot of other people. Now, other questions I found to be a bit more entertaining. Do any of these apply to you? This is a great kindness quiz. You run into an ex-boyfriend, he has more hair than he used to, and you ask him, have you been watering your head lately? Or you receive a sweater from a friend as a gift, a sweater that you happen to see at the thrift store a few days before, and you tell your friend that you know where he or she got it, and perhaps they need to upgrade his or her shopping locations. Or your boyfriend finally proposes, and the ring he gives you is rather small. And so you say, I think you need to go back and get me something much larger. And here's some kindness questions for those still in school. A geeky kid walks by and you start laughing uncontrollably. Or as a teenager, this is what you think. I only hang out with cool people. That does not include my parents. Or I know none of you have experienced that as parents. And then finally, there is a new kid in school who you know needs to get to the same classroom to which you're headed, and so you give them wrong directions. Now, we are all in different places when it comes to kindness. And fundamentally, I really believe this. I believe most people would like to be kinder. Kindness, when you are kind, feels right. And when we're kind, we feel better about ourselves in the long run. It's almost as if we're wired for kindness, but so much can get in the way, things that weigh on us, histories to overcome, pain or hurt. Kindness can be hard if we're struggling with depression or have problems with our self-esteem, or if we're just generally unhappy, or if we're dealing with very real significant sources of stress, or we're worried over big deal issues, or if we can't let go of long-held grudges or resentments. All of that can get in the way of kindness. But in the midst of this, I still believe that most, if not all of us, would like to ramp up how kind we are. Now, I want to say that next week, before I go on this morning, next week I'm going to talk about how we can be kinder not only to others, but to ourselves. But as I continue this week, what I want to do now is I want to just briefly explore the biblical basis of kindness and how kindness is indeed really central to our faith. And if you look at Scripture, Scripture is full of stories that tell us that kindness is something that is very important to God. And God wants us to be kinder. Right at the beginning of the Bible, in the book of Genesis, there's a story of Adam and Eve. They get into some fruit. Things don't go so well. They get booted out of the garden. They're naked. They're embarrassed. They're shamed. What does God do the second that he boots them out of the garden? He clothes them. He puts clothes on them in a profound act of kindness. And in the Old Testament, Continuing, in the book of Deuteronomy, we find these words, much like the words that we heard from Leviticus today. When you shake the olives off your trees, don't go back over the branches and strip them bare. What's left is for the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow. And when you cut the grapes in your vineyard, don't take every last grape. Leave a few for the foreigner, the orphan, and the widow. Don't forget that you were a slave in Egypt. And here God is reminding the people of Israel and all of us to remember that things in life weren't always so easy, or are not always so easy. Remember the hard times that you've gone through. Life is tough, and so when things are okay for you, remember those who are having a hard time. Cut people some slack. Give them a break. You never know what another person is enduring, especially the person who's being unkind to you. Do something kind. Help them out. Don't be insensitive. That's what God is saying through that story. Then there's the great story of Ruth in the book of Ruth. Remember Ruth, who has a loving relationship with her mother-in-law? It's an amazing story of kindness. And Boaz is very kind to Ruth. Boaz says to Ruth, I've heard all about you. I've heard about how kind you were, how you treated your mother-in-law after the death of her husband, and how you left your father and mother in the land of your birth and have come to live among us. God will reward you for such kindness. Or how about the story of the prophet Elijah, who goes out into the wilderness during a terrible drought? What does God do? He sends ravens to care for Elijah in an act of kindness. Then there's the story of Jonah. Remember, Jonah's all bent out of shape and yelling and screaming and having a fit and sulking. What does God do? He provides a shade tree to try and cool Jonah off. An act of kindness. In the New Testament, in Luke chapter 10, there's the story of the Good Samaritan. You know the story well, but Jesus says, go and do the same. And then, you know what happens at most weddings, don't you? 1 Corinthians 13 is read. Love is patient, love is... See? You know it. And then finally, I just want to share that Paul, in his letter to the people of Galatia, talks about the fruit of the Spirit. And one of them he talks about is the gift and the fruit of kindness. And through these and countless other examples, it's clear that kindness is the norm to which all of us are called to live by. Kindness, however, is not just something rooted in the Old and New Testaments, but kindness is something that has a long history within Judaism itself. Now, some of you know that over the last several years, I've become very close friends with Rabbi David, who's been here on a Sunday with us, and Carolyn Mansovitz, who live here in the Valley. And as deeply religious, practicing Jews, they are cherished parts of my life. We meet often, and we talk about very deep things. And it's through them, and Rabbi David introduced me to a Jewish concept called Tikkun Olam. Tikkun space Olam. Goes back centuries. And it's rooted in Jewish mysticism, which means it's hard to understand totally. But the phrase Tikkun Olam literally means to mend the world. To mend the world. Now there's a Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who's written a lot about Tikkun Olam. And here's what he says, and listens to his words as I quote them. The fact that you and I are here is no accident in this time and in this place. It is not an accident that God has given each of us unique gifts and abilities. We are here because someone wanted us to be here, and because there is a task that only we can fulfill. No two people, places, time, and circumstances are the same. Where what I can do meets what needs to be done, there is God's challenge and our task. Now, Rabbi Sachs goes on to point out that when you change a life, you begin to change the world. Said another way, we mend the world, we engage in Tikkun Olam, through what may seem like very small and local acts. You see, every action has the potential to mend just part of the fracture in the world. You see, when we do the right thing, good is the result, and healing happens. And this is where I believe kindness comes in. Kindness changes lives. Kindness changes the life of the person being kind. Kindness changes the life of the person receiving kindness. Kindness heals brokenness and begins in a small way to put the world back to the way that God intends for it to be. Kindness is extraordinarily powerful and impacts people and situations over the course of time in ways we can't conceive sometimes. Well, the converse is also true. When we're unkind, even in a small way, we fracture the world. We harm God's creation. Well, while next week we're going to explore how we can become kinder to ourselves and others, today I want to conclude with something, and I'm going to invite you to do something. And remember, it's an invitation, not a mandate. But what I'd like you to do is, in your bulletin, and you don't need to do it in your bulletin, you can do it in your head, but let me just walk you through this. In the sermon notes for today, if I can find it. Here we go. There's something that says, my kindness commitments. And I'm going to invite you all to spend just a few moments in silence and prayer. And I want you to think about, over the course of the next week, because remember this is two parts, we're going to talk more next week. I want you to think about what you in your own life are going to commit to God to do during the course of the next 7 days with regard to kindness. What are you going to do about kindness over the next 7 days? What are you going to commit to God to do? Now, you can do this in your head, you can write it down. And then, is kind of a symbol for those of you that want to, you don't have to put your name on it, but if you write down just your commitments to God, you can then tear it out of the bulletin, and then I'm going to send a basket around. You put your commitment to God in the basket, and I'm going to leave that basket here on the altar all week. And I want you to think about the fact that your commitment to God with regard to kindness is before God in this chapel, in holy space. And the purpose of this is not to make you all feel bad or deficient or guilty. It's to be encouraging, to help you realize that God is your partner in this. And if you're here this week and you're having a rough time on your commitment, this chapel's open 24/7. Just come in here and pray. And think about it. Think about the kindness. So you don't have to do this, but if you'd like to, don't put your name on it. Nobody's going to read these. They're going to be on the altar. Think about your commitments. Basket will go around, and we'll continue next week. So in a moment, we'll conclude with prayer, but just give you a couple minutes to think about this.